What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. Why you should avoid every wide receiver. It's the exact same video I did yesterday, but for the wide receiver position this time. If you want to know why this video is so important, then I recommend watching the first few minutes of the running back video. I'm sure a lot of you did, but if you didn't, link to that's in the description box down below. So let's start things off with the stat of the day. Yesterday's stat was which quarterback had the best third down completion percentage with a minimum of 45 attempts. I think I said targets, but I guess they're kind of the same thing. But 45 attempts, they threw 45 balls. Answer was Drew Lock. Today's stat, which wide receiver had the most fumbles in 2019? All right, so let's make the case against drafting every one of the top 50 wide receivers. And just like in the other videos I do with this similar style, the list is ordered by ADP, not my rankings. So stop saying that you hate my rankings. These aren't my rankings. This is just where they're going on average in paid leagues. So we'll start things off with the top two wide receivers in Michael Thomas and Devontae Adams. And the top case against these two, and I'm grouping them together because they have the exact same case. It's not that they're going to be bad. These guys are going to crush this season. And the issue with them is just opportunity cost. It's just what you're giving up to draft them in the first round, because you're going to need to give up a late first round pick to get Adams and a mid first round pick to get Michael Thomas. There are just so many fantastic wide receivers in the middle rounds that it's very difficult justifying a first round pick on wide receiver. So no matter how good they are going to end up being, it's really tough to take them this early. And that's really the only case against these two. Number 3, we have Tyreek Hill. Hill is a stud, but it is possible that they give Hardman more looks this season. They didn't really use him all that much last year. Possible they expand his role. And we're expecting Clyde to have a larger role than McCoy and Williams did last year. So while the spiked weeks are still going to be there, it is possible that he sees less volume overall, and that would be a downgrade, especially being taken as wide receiver 3. DeAndre Hopkins, wide receiver 4. Hopkins is a wide receiver changing teams. And as much as we'd like to think that that's not going to affect probably the best wide receiver in football, or at least like a top 3 wide receiver, it could. Wide receivers changing teams is always a downgrade. So tough taking one at 4. Julio Jones, wide receiver 5. The only possible case against Julio is if you think this is the year he starts to decline. But even using that is super thin, because why would you think that? We haven't seen any sort of decline. So that's the only thing I could think of. Dude's a stud. Dude's going to be good. So I think you should still draft him. Chris Godwin, wide receiver 6. He's got a new quarterback. And while no one thinks Winston is better than Brady, this is an upgrade at quarterback, it's entirely possible it's a downgrade for fantasy. Winston never hesitated to throw into quadruple coverage, and that resulted in some long touchdowns and some big plays for Godwin. And his turnovers, when that was happening, because when you throw into quadruple coverage, you're going to have some turnovers, that made the Bucs have to switch to a much more aggressive game script moving forward, right? Because if Winston throws 2 pick sixes, you got to be throwing the ball now every play, and you got to be really aggressive, and that's going to help Godwin. So if we don't expect that to happen as much this season, that's a downgrade. And we're also expecting them to run a lot more 12 personnel. It might be the base set, which is when you have the 1 running back, the 2 tight ends, and then 2 wide receivers, and that means fewer slot snaps for Godwin. So there are a few reasons why he might not be the best pick. Mike Evans at 7. Basically, take what I said for Godwin, just not the slot part, because that doesn't really affect Evans. But also, Brady isn't that great at the deep ball, and that's where a lot of Evans' value comes from. So if you take that away, not the best taking at wide receiver 7. Kenny Golladay, wide receiver 8. The only negative with Kenny is opportunity cost. There isn't a significant gap between him and a lot of the wide receivers below him, but in this range, there is a significant gap between the running backs and the running backs that go in the next few rounds. So you're giving up that cost. You're taking a wide receiver who's pretty similar to ones going after him, instead of taking a running back who's a lot better than the running backs going after them. Amari Cooper, wide receiver 9. The Cowboys drafted C.Lamb this season, and while Cooper is the best wide receiver on the Cowboys roster right now, Lamb is a truly special prospect, and he's certainly going to be better than Randall Cobb. So there's a chance that Cooper has a much lower target share than we're expecting this season and than a lot of people expect him to have. Wide receiver 10 is Adam Thielen. Thielen is going to be the focal point of the passing attack, but this is still a run-first team, and defenses now no longer need to worry about Diggs. So they can pay a lot of extra attention to Thielen, and that's obviously not a good thing for Thielen. DJ Moore, wide receiver 11. Moore is going through a quarterback change, and while it's almost certainly an upgrade, there is a chance that while Bridgewater is better than Kyle Allen, like I'm not even going to say a chance, he is better, maybe he favors other receivers, and maybe he doesn't target Moore as heavily as Allen was. Just a thought. Cooper Kupp, wide receiver 12. Kupp really fell off late last season, and it corresponds to when they used fewer 3 wide receiver sets. He's great from the slot, but he struggles when you move him on to the outside, and that's concerning given that we expect them to do that a lot more this season than they have been in the past. So this is a very expensive price to pay for someone who was not that great down the stretch last season. Allen Robinson, wide receiver 13. The best case against Allen Robinson is pretty thin, if we're going to be honest, but technically Anthony Miller could take just a huge step forward this season and really challenge Robinson for the lead in targets. This one is pretty tough, though. I mean, there really aren't many reasons not to like him. He's one of the players that I have ranked significantly higher than consensus, and if you do want to see exactly where I have him ranked, along with every other player, you can see that at our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. But honestly, I just can't think of very many reasons why he would be bad at the wide receiver 13. It's literally just Anthony Miller could be better than we think this season, so maybe the target share isn't as good, but that's it. Odell coming in at the wide receiver 14. Odell was a wide receiver 35 in points per game last season, and the only difference this year is that we think they're going to run the ball more. So while he was banged up nearly the entire season, he's going to need to improve a lot in order to pay off his ADP. Wasn't good last year, still taking him pretty high at wide receiver 14. Wide receiver 15, JuJu. JuJu was dreadful last season, and while most of that was due to injuries to both himself and his quarterback, it was tough to watch. And with D.Johnson emerging as a pretty good receiver in the offense, it's possible we never see him repeat, and him here is JuJu, never see him repeat the performances he had in the days with Antonio Brown. Calvin Ridley, wide receiver 16. Ridley has been the wide receiver 28 and 17 in points per game over his first 2 seasons. And while the Falcons have the most vacated targets in the league, they added new players to fill a good chunk of those. Plus, Julio's still there. And so Ridley's ceiling is only so high as the wide receiver 2 because Julio is still the guy. Wide receiver 17 is Courtland Sutton. There are just too many guys for Lock to feed. I mean, they've got Gordon, Sutton, Fant, Judy, and it's not like they're going to be a powerhouse. So paying this price for Sutton is a little bit aggressive in my eyes. A.J. Brown, wide receiver 18. Brown was great in his rookie season, but there's only so much room for his role to expand this season. This is a run-first team, and he was already the top target last year. And like I said, he's currently the wide receiver 18 off the board, but he was 26th in points per game last season, and then had 10 combined targets and 73 total yards in their 3 playoff games. So while we are expecting him to improve this season, you're paying for it as the wide receiver 18. Keenan Allen, wide receiver 19. Allen gets a downgrade at quarterback, going from Rivers to a combination of Tyrod and Herbert. And given that we do expect them to run fewer plays on offense this season, he just doesn't have that same sort of ceiling he used to have. Tyler Lockett, wide receiver 20. The risk with Lockett is the potential signing of AB. If they bring Antonio Brown onto the team, that really hurts his weekly floor and ceiling. If they don't do that, then there really aren't very many cases against Lockett. Wide receiver 21, Robert Woods. Honestly, the only case I can make against Robert Woods is the touchdowns. He's only been over 5 touchdowns once in his 7-year career, so that hurts his upside. If a guy's just not going to score 8 or 9 touchdowns, he needs to get there in every other aspect. But honestly, like I said, that's it. I think he's a really good pick. I think that's the only case against him is the touchdowns. DK Metcalf, wide receiver 22. The risk with Metcalf is basically the same as Lockett. An AB signing is going to hurt the upside of Metcalf. But the volume is also a concern. This is a run-first offense, and Lockett is still expected to be the target leader on the team. So that hurts Metcalf being the number 2 on a team that does rank below average in completions per game. Wide receiver 23, DJ Chark. The cases against Chark are also fairly thin. All I can think of is 1, maybe touchdowns again, because, again, this is not a good offense, and so there aren't that many touchdowns to go around. And then 2, a lot of people are high on Laviska Shenault. I don't think this is the season. I think maybe in 2 or 3 years he can have a breakout. But if you are one of those people who are like, nah, Laviska is really good, he could challenge him this season, then I guess that's your case against Chark. But I think that happens a little bit down the line. And again, I think calling touchdowns a risk with Chark is a bit thin because he's already proven he can score on a bad team. T.Y. Hilton, wide receiver 24. Hilton's had some great seasons, but they've mostly come from great quarterback play. I'm not saying he's a bad receiver. I'm saying his epic weeks are coming when he's got Andrew Luck at quarterback. And we do expect his quarterback play to increase this season from what it was last season, but you got to look at last season. He only went over 45 receiving yards in 5 of 10 games, never going over 90. And like I said, Rivers is an upgrade, but he's not Andrew Luck. And he's not that good at throwing the ball deep. So if that's where Hilton gets a chunk of his value, that's where he has the explosion weeks, when he hits on 75-yard touchdowns. If those aren't happening and they're looking to run the ball a lot more this season, that really hurts his upside. Stephon Diggs, wide receiver 25. Diggs is moving to a higher total volume passing offense, but not a high volume passing offense. And while Buffalo has more pass attempts per game, Cousins was more accurate than Allen. So there were actually more completions per game in Minnesota. So the floor is even lower than it was last year, and it was pretty low last year. So that is something to consider. I think a lot of people are going to look at the pass attempts and be like, oh, cool. We're going from a team that had barely any pass attempts to a team that still didn't have a lot, but had more, right? But Allen's not as accurate. So you have to look at the completion percentage, because Cousins actually was completing more passes per game, and that's what we care about, right? The completions are the ones that turn into receptions. That's what we want. Terry McLaurin, wide receiver 26. McLaurin is the guy this season in the passing attack for Washington. But it's for Washington. They're not a good team. So the yardage might be there, might not be there. But the touchdown upside, definitely not very high, because they're not going to score very many. Devonta Parker, wide receiver 27. Preston Williams tore his ACL in week 9. And until that point, it was Williams who had more targets, receptions, and yards. So while Parker went off from that point on, it was because he was the only guy to throw to. With Williams back, it's possible the split looks a lot more like it did early last year, where Parker was more of a low-end 3 with Williams in the lineup. Jarvis Landry, wide receiver 28. Landry was great last season, but it was in a season with an injured Odell. We expect Odell to command more targets this season if he remains healthy, and this is also an improved offensive line. And we know the offensive line was really bad last season, and it kind of forced them behind in a lot of games, and they had to throw to catch up. This season, we think they are going to win a few more games, and with the improved offensive line, they're going to try and lean more run heavy. And that's obviously not a good thing for Landry. Plus, we don't know exactly where Landry's at in his recovery from his hip surgery. It's entirely possible he's limited to start the season, and that's definitely not good at this range in the draft. Wide receiver 29, A.J. Green. Green hasn't been over 1,100 yards since 2015, and he hasn't played since 2018. He's an elite talent, but we don't really have any idea what he's going to look like this season. Michael Gallup, wide receiver 30. Gallup was great last year, and I expect him to be great again this year, but there's definitely a chance that Lamb is further along in his development than most think, and that's going to directly impact Gallup's weekly upside. Wide receiver 31, Tyler Boyd. Boyd ranked 7th among wide receivers in targets last season, yet was only able to finish as the wide receiver 31 in points per game. So with Green returning and Higgins being added in, he's going to need to be a lot more efficient on his targets to pay off his ADP. Marquise Brown, wide receiver 32. Brown scored 7 touchdowns on 46 receptions last season, finishing as a wide receiver 49 in points per game. He's going to improve in his second year, but his ADP is projecting quite the improvement, and that's a bit concerning given that we also expect the offense to regress overall. Deebo Samuel, wide receiver 33, dude's recovering from a Jones fracture, and while he could be ready to start the season, we can't know yet. And he's going to be at elevated injury risk or risk of re-injury when he returns. Wide receiver 34, Will Fuller. Fuller has missed 19 games due to injury in his last 3 seasons. That's not ideal. And even when he was healthy last year, he was only the wide receiver 41 in points per game, including his 14 for 217 and 3 explosion. So he was basically unstartable outside of that week and like one other good week. Julian Edelman, wide receiver 35. Edelman now has a new quarterback in his age 34 season, and while he's likely going to remain the top option on the offense, there's definitely a chance that Harry takes a step forward this year, and since all of Edelman's value comes off of the volume, it would hurt if another weapon emerged, especially if they choose to run the ball more this season, which is certainly possible and I think is going to happen. Wide receiver 36, Brandon Cooks, and he hasn't missed too many games due to injury over the last few seasons, but the concussions are a concern, and he's also a wide receiver changing teams. So he might not look risky on the surface, but he definitely is. Marvin Jones, wide receiver 37. Jones has been over 930 receiving yards once in his 9-year career, and while he will help people win matchups with his weekly upside because he's going to have some explosion weeks, it usually happens on your bench. I mean, really, who's drafting Marvin Jones to start every week? No one. So you'll only be using him as a fill-in a few times, and the odds that you guess right on his big games or the weeks that you need him to fill in because other people are on bye or hurt are also the weeks he goes off, those odds are fairly low. So usually what happens is he goes off on your bench, then you put him in, and he gets 4 points. So not a player I usually like drafting. Wide receiver 38 is Christian Kirk. Kirk was just the wide receiver 35 in points per game last season, including his 6 for 138 and 3 explosion and no DeAndre Hopkins. So he's going to see significantly fewer targets this season, a much lower target share, and he's going to be more inconsistent and have a much lower weekly floor. Deontay Johnson, wide receiver 39. Johnson was really, really good as a rookie, but we also need to remember that James Washington actually finished with more yardage last season, and JuJu missed time and was limited due to injury. So Deontay Johnson is good, but we need to be careful not to hype him up a little bit too much into a point where he just can't return value anymore. C.Lamb, wide receiver 40. I'm extremely high on both Lamb's talent and this offense, but we need to be careful also not to overproject him and overproject this offense. They have Zeke, Cooper, Gallup all ahead of him. That's a lot of receptions, yards, and targets locked up. And it's not like, they're all going to be top 5. It's not like we're going to have a top 5 running back and 3 top 5 wide receivers. Like, there's only so much volume. They're going to be really good, but you can't just give them all 1,210 touchdowns. Like, someone's going to have a lower season, and Lamb is likely going to be that guy. Wide receiver 41 is D.Slayton. Slayton caught 8 touchdowns on 48 receptions last year, which is a touchdown every 6 receptions, and that is entirely unsustainable, especially on an offense that does have a decent amount of playmakers. JuJu, wide receiver 42, he is an extremely talented wide receiver, and he's going to have some incredible seasons, but he's got the same issues as Sutton. There are just too many names on the offense. So he'll have his moments, but you're never going to be able to trust him this season. John Brown, wide receiver 43. Brown ranked 13th in weighted opportunity rating last season and was still just a low-end wide receiver 2. And while he has room to drop a bit given his ADP, his opportunity is going to take a massive hit with Diggs there now. So he doesn't really have that great of a ceiling unless Diggs got hurt. Wide receiver 44, Emmanuel Sanders. The Saints offense runs through Kamara and Thomas. So while on most teams the wide receiver 2 spot is valuable, it's not as valuable on the Saints, and it's going to be very inconsistent. I know they're going to have a lot of yards and touchdowns, but so many of those go to Kamara and Thomas that you're never going to be able to trust their wide receiver 2. Henry Ruggs, wide receiver 45, he's going to have some awesome weeks. He's just going to absolutely dominate a few times. He's going to have like 150 and 2 scores at least once this season. But he's also going to post some absolute duds, and it's going to be pretty difficult determining when he's going to hit big because he's not a volume guy, right? So when he hits for these big weeks is just going to be when they connect deep. And that's very difficult to predict in fantasy, and it's going to be very frustrating to own outside of a best ball league where you would start everyone. S.Shepard, wide receiver 46. The only real negative with Shepard is all of the people on this offense. You've got Slayton, Tate, Shepard, Ingram, Barkley. They're all going to get their targets, and it's not like Daniel Jones is going to throw over 5,000 yards. So the ceiling isn't all that high, but honestly, he's probably being drafted close to his floor. Mecole Hardman, wide receiver 47. From week 6 on, and this is counting through the Super Bowl, so not even through the end of the season, through the Super Bowl, he commanded 24 total targets. That's 1.7 per week. And nothing has changed in the wide receiver core, so he's going to need to be a lot better to pay off an ADP that is even draftable, because he wasn't startable last season, and again, nothing's changed. All they've done is add in Clyde. Mike Williams, wide receiver 48. Williams had 1,000 receiving yards last season, over 1,000, and he was still just 47th in points per game. That's not great news when we expect the overall pass attempts of that offense to drop. Jamison Crowder, wide receiver 49. Crowder ranked 16th in targets last season, but 42nd in points per game. And I don't expect the targets to increase, so where's the upside there? Jalen Reagor, wide receiver 50, last one we'll go over today. He is going to be a fantastic wide receiver in this league, but it's possible that he just isn't fully comfortable with the playbook in week 1, and that could lead to him playing fewer snaps than we'd like. Honestly, though, they don't really have anyone else to play in that spot, so he's going to need to be really uncomfortable with the playbook not to get the snaps. But it's possible because we have seen this offense not play people right away. So that'll do it for why you should avoid every single wide receiver. Again, this is not saying you can't draft a wide receiver because you have to. And there are some great wide receivers. This is just bringing up a case against everyone so that we have to not just look at the positives on every player. We make sure we're looking at everything that could happen on every player. So that's the end of this one. Hope you all did enjoy. If you did, How about hitting that like button? And how about subscribing to the channel if you're new? Thanks for watching.